Hello again, world of YouTube, and welcome back to my demo room. As you can see by the array of speakers here and the TV on the wall and the acoustic paneling, etc., there is great progress, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. I've even made some progress building and assembling the AV rack for my demo room, but that's also not what I want to talk about. And believe it or not, but that's the laser engraver that I still haven't really used. But that's also not the topic of today's video. I've also put some signs on the doors. But in fact, what I do want to talk about is this mess right here. Well, actually not this mess. So found within this mess is my old Tronxy X1, XY1, whatever the model is, 3D printer, which I dubbed Franken-Tronxy because, as you can see, it's not a standard Tronxy. I've extended every axis to an extent, not as much as it will go, but enough to essentially increase the print volume to, I think the maximum I worked it out was 280 by 285 by 220 millimeters, which compared to the standard 150 by 150 by 120 or thereabouts, that's a hell of an improvement. The only downside is recently when I've been doing some prints is my chosen print bed material, which is just, actually I can't remember if this is acrylic or polycarbonate, but as you can see by the markings on there, it doesn't do well with the heat of the nozzle, especially if the nozzle kind of stops over an area and it creates these little craters in there. And you can see I've even had a go at the laser engraver on here. Anyway, the standard print bed, or this print bed section, let me rotate this to give you a better view for those who are not acquainted with the Tronxy X1. Let me just clear some case. You see that a little better? So that's the size of the original print bed. As you can see, it's far past where the nozzle currently is in its home position. So this is how far it will print in the other direction, in this direction as well. The downside is replacing this means putting a lot of strain on where this axis is located. And what I was finding was that even after leveling, this side would droop quite a lot by up to about 2 or 3 millimeters, which doesn't sound a great deal, but at the resolution of 3D printing, that's enough to make your layers not stick, let alone ever meet one another. So I tried compensating by adding like a wedge, if you like, just to kind of not so much curve it up, but just prop it up in one end, so that with the weight it was still balanced. And I managed to get it to the point where the four corners were all within about 1 millimeter of one another, which still isn't great, but for something as flexible and floppy as this, it worked. And there was a few things I managed to print. Well, I didn't dare go bigger than this, because when I tried something bigger than this, well, a lot of this happened. And I don't know how well you could see this here, but this corner, for instance, is completely warped. And you can see a lot of the, if I come closer, you can see a lot of the layer separation going on there. And then there's this notch all the way around at exactly 10 millimeters. And that wasn't just this one print. Every print I've been trying at 10 millimeters, it has this weird notch where the whole printer just seems to shift. Now, I don't know whether that's a problem in the firmware, or if the G code I'm producing is just crap or whatever, but that notch, I don't know how well you can see this, but you can definitely feel it. It's raised all the way around, it's visible, and it's present on all prints I've been putting out. Anyway, so back to bed leveling. So I got the bed level. Then with some larger, slower prints where I wanted higher detail, higher quality, this was heating up too much and it was actually bowing up. So then in the corners, it was getting stuck. It was grinding basically all the way around here. And actually this section here, you can hear how rough that is. That was one of the worst ones, where basically orientated in like this, and this had bowed up just enough for this to start scratching on there whilst it was laying down the bottom layer. So I did a bit of reading to see what I can do about expanding this or replacing this with something bigger to make it support, well, a larger print bed, something this size instead. And that's when people started saying about not being able to balance it. The weight of this hanging all the way out here, because if you think this nozzle has to be able, so put this down. So when this says farthest end, well, there's a bit of a stretch there. When this is at its farthest end, you're almost doubling, if not more than doubling, this print bed, and that weight, regardless of what material you put there, is going to have an effect. It's going to bend. There's no way of getting a flat bed, at least in that direction. That's the biggest problem. This way, not so much, because it's always on top of here, although it might hang over and flop. I've never really had too much of an issue with these two corners sagging, bending up. It's always been out here over no man's land where there's nothing to support the print bed. So anyway, I'm dragging on a bit here. Rather than moaning more about what I can't do with this or what is wrong with this, I happened to stumble upon one of my suppliers for the world of AV who have recently started selling 3D printers. So over in the opposite corner of my office, there is this box. The Creality Ender-3 V3 SE, which is quite a mouthful, but as I said, one of my distributors for AV products and such are now supplying 3D printers. And well, quite frankly, this was the cheapest one they had. And I was honestly astonished at how cheap it actually was. I think it was something like 169 or 170, maybe 171. It was about £170 plus VAT. So it was around £200, which for a fairly large print bed 3D printer is a really good price. Okay, yeah, I know initially for the Tronxy X1 I only paid £99, but I mean, that's a Tronxy X1. Look at it. It is the Franken Tronxy after all. Actually, that's a lie, because it's £99 for the original printer plus all of the upgrades. It's closer to like £140 because those aluminium extrusions apparently are not always the cheapest. And then there was the additional belt and then trying out different print beds. And anyway, so this has a print bed size of, I think it was, I'm sure someone will correct me on this, but it's like 250 by 250 by 220, which is awesome for an out-of-the-box 3D printer. And obviously it's Creality, which is a fairly good brand as far as 3D printers and all that kind of tools go. One thing I did really like about this is that it truly is, compared to the Tronxy X1, an all-in-one 3D printer, because it has a spool holder, it has a heated bed, it has a proper controller and everything, whereas the Tronxy, if anyone's familiar with it, it's more like an unorganized orchestra of parts, because you have the main gantry and then you have some cabling that goes to your control box, and then you don't get a spool holder with it. You have to basically make your own or print one and attach it and hope it doesn't break. Let me show you what I mean. So if I just move this access point, that can go down there. So there's the main gantry. That's a freestanding part. Obviously you've got your XYZ axis and your print bed and all your extruders and your stepper motors attached to that, the main part. Then you've got a whole load of cabling that looks like multicolored spaghetti going to this control box. Now, I know many of you are going to say, go on Thingiverse, there are some all-in-one boxes you can print, and it basically converts this into a single freestanding, well, printer, much like the Creality is. Similarly, with the spool holder, that is an AliExpress purchase. It's just some bearings on, well, basically like inverted skates for this to stand on. I've had all sorts of spool holders. I've tried printing my own that attach to the top of the Z-axis, and they're all good, but it makes this thing really tall and sometimes a bit unbalanced. mainly because there is some flex in it, because this base is just, I think it's 6 or 7mm acrylic. So this does have some inherent flex in it. And when you start adding, especially a full roll, a 1 kilogram spool that's hanging over one side, you do get a bit of sagging on the side there. Then there's also the just sheer rawness of this. So all these switches are open, which is not a problem, because obviously once you start a print, you know not to mess around with it. Not going to suddenly start pressing buttons and see what happens and whatever. But even after assembling, there were a few modifications I had to make. So for instance, these rollers on the Z-axis, they were not sitting snug. I had to modify the wheels by basically padding them out to get a snug fit, because the end of the gantry used to move up and down by about an inch. That's how loose they were. And I don't know whether that was just an error in this being cut or if something was bent or whatever. But yeah, that was one modification I had to make. Obviously, since then, other modifications include this cooling fan, which is no longer connected, but you know, again, that's one of the things. And then you can see it again at 10mm. There's that ridge, so you can see where the print bed was there. Hit 10mm and you get this ridge all the way around your prints, which, yeah, I'm still getting sick of that. So anyway, yeah, like I said, this is a bit raw. It's many parts. It's cumbersome. You can't just pick it up and move it somewhere. And of course, then there's the power supply, which is that, you can't really see it from here, but that big brick back there. So back over here to Creality Corner. In a couple of weeks, when I have a bit of free time, what's free time? I will be assembling this once the other bench is cleared and I've moved the Tronxy away. And although don't fear, the Tronxy is not going to disappear, because I am thinking of modifying that into more like a traditional printer. So if you imagine a 2D printer from a 3D printer, so I'm going to remove the ability for it to go up and down on the Z-axis and attach basically a pen holder to it, so you can do some plotting and whatever. See how well that works. I've seen a few other people convert like CNC machines, laser cutters, engravers, etc. to, let's call them 2D printers with pen holder attachments. And I quite like the idea of it. Not for really drawing anything technical or accurate or whatever, but just to kind of play around, see what can be done. So that's all I have for today. I'm sorry if this video's dragged on a bit and I didn't really show much, but I'm excited about this update. I've had that Tronxy now for, I don't know, 6-7 years. It's done me well. It has even allowed me to produce some custom mounts, brackets and things for work that are still in use in some of my customer projects at the moment. So like I said, yeah, for a £99 initial investment, brilliant. That's a good way to start with 3D printing or learn about it. Okay, maybe 10 years ago it was, not anymore. Nowadays, for that kind of price, you can buy a truly all-in-one, like kiddie 3D printer with a small print bed, and kids can use it and do whatever. You know, let's just say I'm stepping it up a notch with 3D printing, because one of my next projects is going to be printing this on a larger scale, and many of them. So this is meant to be a sound diffuser. Although these holes are a bit big, you can see I can put my finger in there, they should be a lot smaller. I was experimenting with fill percentages, and I think I set this at, it was either 3 or 5%, which is obviously not enough, because these need to be about 1/4 that size. So I need to ramp it up to like 10%, and then make this a bit deeper as well, because the idea is that the sound travels into these little channels and the sound energy dissipates by the time it gets to the end before they can reflect out. And then these will sit at first reflection points behind that acoustic felt panel I've got in my demo room. I'm going off on a tangent here, explaining that, which I didn't mean. Anyway, I hope you have a great, and I will no doubt catch up with you. Probably not soon, I'm bloody busy at them, eventually. So thanks for watching, and if you want to see more, be sure to subscribe. Thank you.